Hello and welcome to this episode of the Star Wars Generations podcast. Friends, the Bad Batch is finished and we have a lot to talk about. Looking back not only at the final episode, but this whole last season and the show as a whole. We're going to talk about what role does it play in the larger Star Wars story? How do we feel about it? What do we want to see more of from these characters and the like? And we're doing it with two people who are not my regular co-hosts, but have been very frequent guests and in one case, co-hosts for quite a while. First, starting with Danielle of Written in the Star Wars. Danielle is one of the most prolific TikTokers and tweeters about Star Wars that I know, so often coming in with perspectives that I haven't heard or seen, knowing far more how she is able to know all this about the clones and still get her PhD in something different. I have no idea. But Danielle is just one of the foremost people in Star Wars content creation. Danielle, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me back. I always like being on here.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. And Riki Hayashi was well, him and his partner Sarah were co-hosts throughout the Clone Wars and the Rebels podcasts. He is now my co-host on the Superhero Ethics podcast, and he is kind enough to come back about 15 minutes after we finished recording our Superhero Ethics episode on X-Men 97. So, Riki, how are we doing?
Great. I got my lunch in that time.
Sounds good. Sounds
Are
good.
you are
So,
you saying that you can't get a PhD in clones? Like a Star Wars clones? You could definitely get a PhD in real
Oh
life
yeah.
clones.
I don't know. I bet you could. I could see someone making a case out of it for probably a media studies class too,
Yeah.
or
I guess
literature.
it wouldn't be a PhD, but I do believe like you can get advanced degrees in media and that kind of
Hmm.
stuff now. So
Yeah.
maybe I'll
as
go back
someone
to school.
as someone who was once accepted for a PhD on ethics in media, I took a different perspective, but I was specifically going to do it on the ethics of villainy in comic books and comic movies. I'm sure someone could do something on, you know, what is the value of life in the way a TV show like the Clone Wars presents it in a world
Mhm.
where it is clones fighting droids. So yeah, if someone has already written that master's or PhD thesis, please let us know. We'll be happy
Yeah.
to have you on as a guest. But today we're talking about the Clone Wars. Sorry. Today we're talking about sort of an extension of the Clone Wars, the TV show The Bad Batch. Not only is the final episode out, but is the final episode of both this season and of the show itself. We've had three wonderful seasons with some, may all think are wonderful, may not, may not. But we want to talk about it. We're going to talk a little bit about the ending of the show, and we're going to talk about kind of the show as a whole and sort of how we feel about it, what we learned from it, what it tells us about the Star Wars story. So, Riki, let me just start by asking you, what did you think of the ending? How the last episodes, how the series ended up?
It ended where it needed to end. Is how I have been thinking about it. And it's a overall I enjoyed the show. I liked the show a lot, but I think the ending and especially this final season, season 3, felt a little too on the rails was the phrase I've been using. And in a way that left me dissatisfied because I felt like it dragged on a little too long to where we knew it needed to go. And
Mhm.
it even took like a weird detour and a reset with Omega escaping and then getting recaptured. And it felt like we were retreading the same ground in the same season. And I didn't enjoy that as much. But overall, the show was fantastic. A solid addition to the Star Wars canon. And especially the character work. Like that's the most important thing for me is characters. And I loved the Bad Batch characters, especially with when they added Omega. And I think that was another part of the disappointment was that it just didn't feel like we got more character development in this season. Like it was all kind of already done for us.
Mhm.
So overall, like that's where I am. Like I'm happy I watched it, but I wish season 3 had been a little different. I'm not sure how, but
Mm. Danielle, what about yourself?
I definitely see the points that you make, Ricky. Um, I come at it from a little bit of a different perspective, I think, because I can see where they were coming from with wanting to have her recaptured. Because to me, they wanted Crosshair to be there and to have um, loving feelings for her and watch her get
Mhm.
captured and see what that does to him. And so that it makes sense to me in that element, but I do take your point that it is quite close together. And I think that if there had been a separation of maybe a season between those, then maybe it wouldn't have felt as repetitive as closely as it was. But I do see like their reasoning behind it, and the parallels that they wanted to make between Hunter having to watch her get captured and Crosshair having to watch her get captured. To me, those three characters, Omega, Crosshair, and Hunter, are the main characters of the show, and so I get what they were trying to do there. Whether or not it was successful for everyone is another question. It worked for me, because of those emotional beats, and that was, to me, where season 3 really succeeded. I think is that it gave us a lot. It was very aware, I think, that this was the last, like our last time with the batch this way, and for me, it served on its emotional beats, and on the need to have Hunter hug Omega and not just Omega hug Hunter. There's a profound difference there, and we finally got that this season, which we hadn't gotten previous seasons. The need to see Crosshair relate to Omega and actually choose to accept her in his life and accept someone for the first time really in his life. To see also that between Hunter and Crosshair, and it gave us that. It did happen quite quickly, but it gave me what I wanted emotionally, and it gave me what I wanted for the batch's story. There were a lot of things that left to be explored elsewhere, I think, this season. But those weren't my main concerns. My main concern was how they were going to wrap up and give us a satisfying conclusion to the batch themselves, and they did that for me.
Right. I'm going to definitely weigh into this question as well, but first, here's a quick message. We've started the conversation, but now we want to hear from you. Send your thoughts or questions to Matthew@theethicalpanda.com or The Ethical Panda or Star Wars Generations on Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok. You can even chat with us directly on Discord. Just use the link in the show notes or at theethicalpanda.com. If you like this content, why not become a member? You get early access to ad-free episodes for all Ethical Panda podcasts, along with bonus content at the end of most episodes, plus member-only episodes. It's just $5 a month or $55 for a full year. Sign up at theethicalpanda.com or through a link in the show notes. And now, back to our episode. Thanks, folks. Welcome back. So, Riki, I hear what you're saying. I think for me, Danielle, I agree with what you were saying, but I would also add, for me, the real beauty of her getting captured again was it showed how much she's an inspirational force to those around her. To me, she just has like so much leadership ability, which is where I think in many ways, like she mimics Hunter in the hunting ability and the stalking. But, we start with the season with her and Crosshair wants nothing to do with her. He's just self-loathing and given up. And she inspires him to like find himself again and to work with her to get out. And then at the end, she meets up with these Jedi children who are really kind of despondent and they miss home and they don't know what to do. And she again is able to bring them together to help them overcome their fears, to help them believe in themselves, and then help them to move forward. And could they have found a way to do it where she breaks in instead of she gets captured again? Maybe. But I do also agree with what Danielle was saying about the seeing Crosshair have that moment was really powerful for me. I think though the thing that I liked most about the ending, because I admit it was not what I expected at all. I expected a lot of these characters were going to get Rogue One, where I by which I mean that they would die. I am a big believer that I don't want people to keep introducing new, very powerful characters who haven't shown up and to tell us they would be around by the time of things that happen later, and then we're left wondering well, but why didn't they show up? And so I expected the only way that they could do that was to kill off some of these characters. And I actually found what they did was incredibly satisfying. They did not bring Tech back, which I was very glad about. I think people were really worried that the clone trooper who was stalking them was going to be like a Winter Soldier version of Tech. I didn't want that. They didn't do that. But having them all basically retire at the end, and this idea that, yeah, they did sit out the rest of the Empire period and they deserved it. There's actually one thing I I realized, Riki, you and I didn't get to talk about in X-Men 97, but as an interesting plot point, this idea of when do you get to say, you know what, I've done my part for the fight and the fight's still going on, but I get to go have a kid. I get to go rest. And so the idea that they are all now taken out of the story, but Omega's going back to be a fighter pilot, to be an X-Wing pilot. And, you know, I think they really kind of this idea that she believes Ventress, she doesn't think she has any force powers, and so they just became latent again, and so we don't have to worry about her as another force user running around. I just thought that way of wrapping it all up was not only beautiful and powerful in an epilogue, but also kind of it addressed a lot of my concerns of why aren't these characters being seen again if they're so powerful.
Yeah, I really appreciated that ending because I talked about this on a recent video I posted on TikTok. That it gave closure to their story, just enough to where it's not a complete. It's not a. This is it. There's nothing else there's ever going to be about them again, which Star Wars rarely does. Rogue One being the main exception, but in it but it still left a sense of like they got to have the life that they were searching for. And in large part, they got to have that life because of Tech and his sacrifice. And they got to raise this child in peace and happiness, and she knew love when she didn't know it before. And all of that helps create this young woman who would go off to fight in the rebellion for what she knows is right, because she was raised by people who taught her what was right and encouraged what was right in her. And now it's left it open for the possibility of future stories. Doesn't have to be. I would be, if there was never another story about Omega, Hunter, Wrecker, Crosshair. I'm not putting Echo in there because I do want more from Echo, but if there was never another story about the four of them, I would still be satisfied with the ending that we got. I thought it was very beautiful.
Yeah, I thought the ending was good. I wish that Wrecker and Crosshair had been in that postscript and show them, but
I
like,
have a I have a reason for why they weren't, but I'll let you continue.
oh no, by all means, please, I want to hear this.
Well, for me, it has always been Hunter and Omega. He was the first one who saw her in episode 1, season 1, when they're out watching the emperor give his new speech. Um, he looks up and he makes direct eye contact with Omega, and that's the very first time we ever see Omega. It's the very first time he ever sees Omega, and she's very excited. And throughout the show, before we get to season 3, whenever he has to share a lot of that time with Crosshair, I think willingly he does that. It's him and her. They're the father-daughter duo whereas Wrecker, Echo, and Tech and Crosshair kind of become the brothers to her. Hunter is very much the father. And so to me, it was really meaningful, especially with season 3 not having as many of those moments between just them that we got in seasons 1 and 2, to have this really big, meaningful, impactful moment just be the two of them. And whether or not we could have had Wrecker and Crosshair like wander off a little bit and then let them have their moment, I don't know. But I will say that even though I said I was happy with this ending, if they never came back to anything else, them not showing Old Man Crosshair and Old Man Wrecker kind of gives me hope that they're like, well, we're gonna show them to you one day. So it's like that dangling carrot in front of me. Keep
and
watching. We'll get there
No,
eventually.
maybe this is just because I'm such a cynic. I had the opposite. Particularly because he didn't mention like he let them sleep, but he wanted to see her off or something. I thought they passed away because they are getting quite old by now. And like,
Oh, I
oh
assumed that they were still
no,
alive. Why would you say that?
it's where my brain goes. I mean, they are
wait,
aging.
no, like
They're
in the
not that old.
conversation, don't they specifically mention them?
Yeah, they get mentioned.
Do they? Okay, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, they get name dropped. So Danielle, like I agree, like it was a lovely moment between those two. Like I wouldn't take away from that and just like plop the other two in. But what if after Omega flies away, Hunter comes back to the house and the other two are there, and they knew she was leaving,
Mm-hmm.
and they just like acknowledge that
Yeah.
they had this conversation and agreed that Hunter should see her off.
Yeah.
But especially, I wanted to see Old Man Wrecker like making art, like painting or something,
Yeah.
like something creative, like just
Yeah.
see what their future was about.
He does
And
paint bombs now instead of explosives.
yeah,
Yeah. And I mean, one of my hopes is, and we'll talk more about like future projects in the bonus content section. Become a member for that. I I think we're going to keep getting clone animated content because there's clearly a huge market for this. I think one of the next shows is going to be about Rex and Echo, and like how do we eventually wind up with Rex and Wolf and
Gregor.
Gregor, on that planet chasing the weird monster.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
like
Because we didn't get to see when Wolf turns away from the Empire.
Yeah.
Like
So
he
Right.
has that moment where he lets them go, but it still goes back to work for the Empire.
and in something like that, I think like I want the boys to mostly get their retirement. But if like once a season, or once every other season, Rex goes back and is like, guys, I've got this one really tough mission. Can Crosshair come help me as a sniper or something like that? I
Yeah.
think that could be fun.
Yeah.
I think, screw it. We're not even gonna do it in the bonus section. I'm just gonna do it now. Someone mentioned that I saw that video you posted, Danielle. It's gonna be in the show notes. And my first thought was something that one of your commenters also thought. I know it's been back and forth forever, but we keep hearing the idea that we're going to get some kind of content about X-Wing fighters. And maybe
Oh,
it's going to be about them during the Galactic Civil War. Maybe it's going to be about them during the New Republic phase. But I think that could be a great way to have Omega be a character, but not it be, as Danielle says so well in that TikTok, that this is really Omega's show in a lot of ways. And in this, what I'm kind of thinking is it wouldn't be her show, as you were sort of saying. She's more of like either she's like a side character who they see every now and then, or she's just part of an ensemble.
Mhm.
And like there's some actors I don't want to recast, but like I would have no problem with a younger actor playing Wedge. Like make Wedge
Yeah.
the main character and Omega as a character, and it's just about X-Wing pilots,
Yeah.
Like I think that could be great.
I think that would
Well,
be amazing. I would love it. Yeah, anything with Omega, but I also really want her back in animation at some point because of
Yeah.
Michelle Ang. She just did such a beautiful job with Omega's voice. Like she's such a good voice actor for her. She
Yeah.
portrays so much through her voice, and I noticed she loves this character so much that
Mhm.
I just really want there to be more down the line for her
Yeah.
in animation. But I have nothing against live action if they cast her well. I'm always a bit wary about that.
And I think that the show I'm talking about, it could just as well be animated.
It could be.
X-Wing
Yeah, that's true.
animated X-Wing fights are fun.
That'd be nice.
I mean, a live action show, the X-Wing fights would basically be animated.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
essentially.
lines are so blurred now when it comes to special effects.
Yeah. That's fair. That's fair. Let me pull us back a bit then to kind of talk about the Bad Batch as a whole. How do you think if you can remember, like, what did you feel when you heard that this was the thing that we were going to get a show about, and how do you feel now that we finished it?
Well, first off, when I first read the tweet where they announced it, I thought it said the bad BITCH.
Oh
And I
God!
was so confused why everyone was so excited about this. I was like, "What? Star Wars? This isn't the Star Wars I grew up with. What are they doing?"
I don't know if they made a
That
show.
would have been the Assad show.
Yeah, I was gonna say if
Yeah,
they made a show just
yeah.
about Ventress, that'd be the perfect name for it.
I was so confused, literally for like 30 seconds. Like, then that's a long time. Count to 30, like actually set a time. That's a
Uh-huh.
long time to think that that show is called that instead of the Bad Batch. And then I realized, and I was like, oh, interesting. Um, I think I just watched the arc in the Clone Wars like once, and so at that point, and so I was like, okay, interesting. I'm not really sure like what else they're gonna do with that storyline. Like, I don't know what else there is to do with it because we had no idea that Omega was going to be in there until we actually saw the
Right.
episode.
Yeah,
And I loved that they did that. I love that they kept it secret and that they were able to keep it secret until then. But yeah, I was confused, but then very pleasantly surprised that I have been a Bad Batch lover since I loved them in the Clone Wars, but I have loved the series pretty much since Omega stepped on the scene. Like, she has
Mhm.
been one of my favorite characters since the moment she was on screen. I just think she was such a welcome addition to the franchise, and she has continued to be so. And I'm glad that people who weren't so keen on her then have grown to love her and like her, if not love. But yeah, that was me then. And I think I don't know what the rest of your question was, or if that answered it. Sorry.
Yeah, kind of just looking back at the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved their introduction in the Clone Wars final season. The Clone Force 99 being a callback to that original Clone 99 was
Mhm.
beautiful because that was one of the highlights of the early parts of that TV show. And I agree, like the hiding and the reveal of the Omega character was great. When we get to trying to back explain somehow Palpatine returned, like that's when I started to get a little skeptical of the show. Like I enjoyed the parts where it was focused on the Bad Batch. Matthew described it as like Star Wars A Team, right? When
Yeah.
they're going on all those missions for Sid and having that adventure. I That was my favorite part of this show.
Yeah.
But when so many Star Wars shows are trying to explain how Palpatine returned and like doing these name drops of Necromancer, it's like, come on already. Like, we don't need everything to explain this one line.
Yeah, that's fair. I I did enjoy that subplot of it because I think they took an interesting route with it, especially with the fact that it ends up like it actually not being the reason, but being the reason that it took so long, I guess.
Mhm.
And I enjoyed that it ended unexpectedly because I expected them to show something that was like, oh, but wait, this thing survived. Hemlock survived. Actually, very glad that he
Mhm.
actually died, and that Crosshair and Hunter both got into him and Omega in her own way. Um, but I guess I viewed it more as they were using that as a plot in order to
Mhm.
still tell these random A team stories about the Bad Batch because I think after the Clone Wars, they kind of decided that they couldn't do just these random episodes anymore for this level of animation. They still kind of do it for like Young Jedi Adventures and stuff, but
Mhm.
think they've definitely felt like they needed a through line, and the easiest one at that point was the tie to the sequels. But I take your point with it. There,
Yeah,
every
but
every show we have right now is that.
yeah, like the Hemlock, I think the Hemlock reveal in season 2 happened around the same time that Moff Gideon was doing his thing with clones on
Yeah.
the Mandalorian, right? So it's just like everything at that time, everything in Star Wars was coalescing around this idea.
Do you know
Yeah.
what I would have really liked? And one of my, I don't know if I would call it a criticism, maybe a critique, depending on whether or not they go back and deal with this more, is that I was more intrigued by the CX troopers.
Yeah.
And I think that that would have been a really great through line to have if they could have introduced them earlier, and had it be like, what's going on here because I want to know the science behind that, like what he was doing with it and whether it involves any of the cloning science they were using.
Mhm.
Was he funneling funds he was getting for Project Necromancer into the CX Trooper project? That seemed to be his own personal thing. I would have. I think that would have been even more interesting to me than the tie to direct tie to Project Necromancer and the amount of time they spent on that.
Mhm.
But yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely there with you, especially because that also has a fun tie-in, and that I think we're supposed to think is that like the CX Trooper and all that that Hemlock is working on is the program that goes through a lot of fits and starts and eventually becomes the Death Troopers of Moff Gideon.
Mhm.
Um, and we talked about this question of like why do we have to keep doing Necromancer a lot on the Star Wars Generation podcast, the episode by episode coverage. So I won't really rehash all of it. I'll just kind of give a summary. Is that I think where I wound up coming to is because I was very much like you, Riki. I was kind of groaning a bit when I heard that's where they were going. but then I sort of have this attitude of if I will be very okay with this if the words Project Necromancer and cloning are not mentioned in whatever comes next. Like, this did give us a lot more background, and The Mandalorian gave us a lot more background. And I think, as you were saying, Danielle, what it kind of shows us is this is a program that they keep trying to start and then failing. And that kind of ties in well with, and then it took another 30 years. And even then, all they got wasn't a fully fledged clone, but was the like zombie Palpatine kind of strapped up to that thing on Exegol, which again is a plotline I hate, but it's what we have, so fine. If there's a sense of now we have done that and now we can tell other stories, I think I'll be like, okay, then it did that. If not, I think I'm going to look back and be like, I'm really frustrated with it.
I got bad news for you, Matthew. It's not actually news, but it's speculation that the continuation of the Ahsoka Thrawn storyline is going to come back to Tantus, and they're going to like merge Necromancer with the Night Sister magic, and that's where this is ultimately going to end up.
So I think that is possible, and I certainly think there was some necromancy. Like, I still want to know what was the name in Ahsoka of the kind of the person who looked like a death trooper but had force skills.
Oh yeah.
It's like Mantis.
It was the Greek. It was the Greek name, right?
Yeah.
Wait, are you talking about Merrick?
Merrick, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh no, okay.
You know, there was also speculation when that character was killed, and there was like green smoke that looked a lot like the smoke of the Night Sisters.
Yeah.
I would prefer it if there was really like we've got some hints of this, but the idea of like that the Imperial Council in the New Republic days is this power struggle of some people who want to do Project Necromancer, but other people who are like, no, let's do Thrawn instead. Like, that kind of a thing.
Ooh, that would be interesting, actually. Sorry, I hear Thrawn and I'm like, Thrawn.
Right? I do love that they went back to Mount Tantus and made Mount Tantus canon again, which is great because that again is from the original Thrawn stories. I think though, and I hear Danielle what you're saying, that everything wants a through story right now, which I guess I find disappointing because I think I did love Bad Batch at first the most when it wasn't that, when it really was more episodic. And when it felt to me like the through story was the gradual shift from the Republic to the Empire.
That's
because
fair.
that's sort of what I love.
That's what season 1 was, essentially.
It really was, yeah. And even season 2, every time they'd go out, they'd see things shifting more, and how are people dealing with that and stuff. And yeah, I think I loved everything. I did like the third season, but I think those A-Team days, and especially Sid was just such a great character that I think that was my favorite period of the show. Or I think it really hit a high mark.
I'm really surprised they didn't bring her back in some aspects this season. All they did was mention her when the CX2 trooper said that he tortured her for information. There are a few things I'm surprised we didn't see again. I understand. I am a little surprised, and some of them may be critiques. But yeah, I think my favorite season still is. I mean, my favorite episodes largely come from season 2. Season 1 always has a special place in my heart. And I think season 3 was just it was a goodbye. And I could feel it in every episode. And I think that makes it special to me because I feel like they really did give like the Bad Batch stands a goodbye every episode. And I appreciate that. But I think probably season 2 is the first half of season 2, maybe my favorite. And then I don't know. I get what you mean. Like I hadn't thought about it in the terms that you had used about the through line being transition from the Republic to the Empire immediately after. But you're right. That is season 1, and I did appreciate it for that. Yeah.
And I will say, like, we've all seen shows that just kind of go on too long because there's no more story to tell, but there's still money to be made. It really felt to me like this was the complete story. And I don't know if they had planned or if this was always their plan, but they certainly made me believe that like they weren't ending it now because they're being canceled. They were like, this is the story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And they did that fabulously.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, the thing about the through line transitioning to the Empire, in the pre-show, I talked about being an Imperial enthusiast. And I mentioned like mostly pertaining to the technology and ships and stuff. And the thing that I have loved seeing At the end of this show, and another one recently, Tales of the Empire, we get to see the first Imperial class Star Destroyer roll off the line, and it's Tarkin's flagship.
Yeah.
Pretty
And it's
cool. Yeah.
and it's probably the only one, right? Because his fleet it's flanked by the old Clone War era Venator Star Destroyers. So we've seen that. We've seen the Stormtrooper first generation armor. We haven't seen our first TIE fighter yet, right? Come off.
I don't think
But
so.
like those are the things that I really enjoy. Is like like now we're at this point in the
Yeah.
technology and the history.
Yeah. I liked and also was very pained and I mean this is off topic because I don't think we see them in the Bad Batch, but you mentioned Tales of the Empire. Just really quickly, they have the clones in their dark armor and I guess we see a little bit of that in the Bad Batch. Crosshair has it in season 1 and a little bit in season 2. But seeing how they force the clones to transition like even visually with their armor in this period before they completely replace them with stormtroopers and dark troopers and everything was really interesting for me to see on that level.
I also just think with the Crosshair story that they did, you know, we've talked about this before on the Superhero Ethics podcast, that one of the real questions I think anytime you're telling a story about heroism is like, okay, well, are you supposed to be the paladin who follows all the laws and trusts the law? Or are you supposed to be the character the Batman, who's willing to break the law because they think the law is wrong? And like you can tell that story in all sorts of different ways, and that's obviously huge generalizations of those two characters. But they really did. I think those stories are especially important for military and police type situations where, the like, well, but this is my order. I have to trust my higher up. Well, do you? And the way from the very beginning, they started this question of like, we're being ordered to do this, but is this a legitimate order? Should we follow it? And all the way to the end of Crosshair finally coming to that realization as well, and his break with that and coming back to the Bad Batch, it would have been so easy to just make Hunter right and Crosshair wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't think we like thought Crosshair was right to obey, but I at least never had a moment where I thought like, oh, Crosshair is just evil for obeying,
Yeah.
And in terms of like the thing I've always thought about is like, what does it mean to tell these soldiers from literal birth, your purpose is to obey, your purpose is to, follow all these orders. I just they've always told that story in broad strokes, and I thought in Crosshair's story in this show, they told it so beautifully.
Yeah, I think what Cody says to him in season 2 about the choices that they make when they're given them are what define them. And to add on top of that, of course, Cody doesn't know about the chips at this point, presumably. The choices they're able to make, not just that they do make, but that they're able to make, that aren't taken from them, that aren't influenced otherwise by something else, is I think one of the things that the Bad Batch handled best as far as a theme goes, like you said, especially in the I think in season 3, because we see not only do we have Crosshair's redemption that we're working with, but Imri's redemption and Nala Se's redemption. And one thing I really loved about the finale was that it gave Nala Se a redemption through death that felt earned. And you can't always say that with redemptions that end in death. But I think Nala Se, and this isn't me saying that Nala Se fully redeemed herself or that she made up for what she did with the chips and with Fives and how all the things she helped with that, with subjugating the clones. But I think she recognized that she hadn't made the right choices in her life. And I think that she tried to make up for that through Omega. And I think that by protecting Omega, even if it was just for Omega in her mind, by doing that, she did end up protecting the futures of dozens of clones who were able to escape Tantus that night, and of the force sensitive children that were held in the vault. And to me, that was one where I was like, I can look back on her and think really good thoughts about her, and not think she should have lived to redeem herself truly, because I think she did all she could do. all that I wanted her to do as a character, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whereas Imri, she she is, I mean, she's a clone, so she faces all of the same things that the clone trooper is faced with. She was raised and bred to be a certain way, to be compliant and to follow orders, and she never got to have a childhood like she tells Echo. And so for her to be able to live, not only to redeem herself and redeem the actions that she took, but to also have a life that she was never allowed to have before, is a really beautiful ending for both of them, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, Nala Se as a character probably didn't get the screen time she deserved, I think.
It's fair. It's fair.
And part of it is maybe just her speech patterns. Like I'm someone who talks kind of slow sometimes, but her speech patterns would make it very difficult for her to be a main character like
It
on a show like
changed.
this.
I don't know if you noticed, I went back and watched some season 1 episodes,
Oh,
and
really?
she spoke faster in season 1 than in season 3, and I
Oh,
don't know if that was intentional,
huh.
but it was really interesting.
It's interesting. I wouldn't have been able to put my finger on that specific change, but I definitely felt in season 3 she was carrying a lot more weight.
Yeah, that might be why. That might be why.
Okay.
And I certainly thought, kind of to me, when you're talking about like, does she do this for Omega or whatever? I think she does, but I think in that, but like I think you were kind of saying this as well, but like to me, redemption isn't math. You can't say like your
Yeah.
crimes are a total of 12, and so your redemption has to be like
Yeah.
3 things of 4 or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think in many ways, like her original sin, like all the Kaminoans and so many others, is that they see the clones not as living sentient beings,
Mm.
but as products, and that
Yeah.
you can treat as products. And that by the end, she sees Omega as a living sentient being
Yeah.
with her own rights and her own freedom, and that through her sees them. And so to me, that's and the fact that she's literally welling, like, yes, she kind of like gets knocked over, but I don't think she had any thought that she was gonna live when she took that
No.
thermal detonator into that room. I think she was
She knew what would
planning.
happen.
Yeah, and I think that her sacrificing her life on behalf of lives that she did not think she had the value of full
Mhm.
lives, I thought was very intentional and very well done.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, to some degree, she had to die, right? From a narrative standpoint, the most dangerous thing was her knowledge.
Yeah.
So if she allows herself to live and be captured and manipulated by the Empire, if they recapture Omega and like force her or even, like clone her or mind probe her, like that would be the most dangerous thing from her perspective. So it's like one of those classic, not only do you have to destroy the physical, like the computer data, but the data in her head, like
Yeah.
Miles Dyson in Terminator 2.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah. I thought
exactly.
that her last line to Rampart being, "It'll always be Kaminoan," in reference to
Oh,
science. I thought that was really beautiful, and also speaks to your point,
yeah.
Ricky, of they will never have this Kaminoan science. They will always be searching for something that is second best, essentially. And that is what takes them so long, is that they don't have that. They don't have, like you said, her mind. They don't have her knowledge, everything that they need for that. They have to find another way there. And yeah, that line was, it was one of, to me, one of the most powerful last lines for a character. It requires knowing the long history of this, like going all the way back to Attack of the Clones, the Clone Wars, and to really get like the gut punch of that line. And
Yeah,
I thought so much power in so few words. I loved it.
yeah.
And to be able to say it to the man who destroyed Tipuca City.
Yep.
Mhm. Very
Yeah.
much.
I didn't even think of that. That she is looking at the man who ordered the destruction of her
Oh, yeah,
people.
like that
Oh man,
confrontation
that's
between
another
those
level.
two.
Wow, man, I can't believe I didn't even think of it that way. I kind of forgot because Rampart was so sassy and silly for most of his time this season. I
Mhm.
kind of forgot the depth to that.
The war
Yeah.
crimes.
Yeah, he was
Yeah, the depth of the war crimes, I know. It's Nashir Dalal. His voice just amazing this season.
it's so fun, yeah. What did we think of the Ventress of it all? She was
Ooh.
in the trailer, and I think a lot of expectations were built for that, and then
Ugh.
she had this one episode that I think we all talked about being a pretty good episode, or at least I thought I've heard you 2 of you talk about, but, I know a lot of people have kind of mixed feelings about the fact that that's all she did. How did you all feel about it?
I liked that that was all she did.
Mhm.
I think they put her in the trailer for a couple reasons. One, gets excitement. Two, to kind of get rid of like to be like, yeah, she's in it. Like we're not gonna hide it. I think if they wanted her to be anything more than what she was in the season, that they would have gone to greater lengths to keep it a secret.
Mhm.
And to me, that episode was important in that it was supposed to, in my mind, it was supposed to quell the force sensitive questions about Omega for this show.
Right.
Because to me, what it presented was she might be force sensitive, she might not. We don't care. That's
Right.
not the question that we're focused on right now. That's not something we care to explore right now. And it did that for me. Like I watched that episode and I didn't walk away thinking, "Oh, she's not," or "Oh yeah, I was right, she is." I walked away thinking it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I realized for some people it didn't do that, but for me that was the lesson in it. And I think Jennifer Corbett has said that that was supposed to be the lesson, but I don't know.
Mhm.
It worked for me, and I like that it set up something potential for Ventress in the future, something like with the path or something.
Yeah.
Well,
Riki, what were
Matthew, like you, you still believe that Omega might be force sensitive? Is that accurate?
so my understanding is that she does have, like, and again, I hate this is the terms we use, but this is where we are, that she has a higher than normal midichlorian count. And that is part of that the reason why the Empire was focused on her is that she is believed that she carries force sensitive genetic material. And it did feel to me very clear that she was force sensitive in that episode. And I think we'd seen a couple signs before that were hinting at that, but I thought that episode specifically said she has the potential to become a force user. But and this is something that's been said in other Star Wars projects, much more in the books, I think, but maybe mentioned once or twice in TV shows, that if a person's force powers they just don't touch, that they can become latent and basically be
Mhm.
forgotten about.
Yeah.
And so I think a similar point, but maybe a little bit of a different spin on it than what Danielle was saying. To me, I thought it was saying that like she's force sensitive enough for the Empire to want her back for the cloning. That if she was taken to the Jedi Temple, 20 years earlier, I think she would have grown up to be a Jedi. But that she's not, it's not like she's Luke, that like it can just be turned back on at age 20. I think like I would find it kind of a betrayal of the character if, she becomes a force sensitive X-Wing pilot in, that project we were talking about, something like that. I think the to me the idea here is, and here's maybe the kind of it doesn't matter thing, is that she has the potential she has a genetic propensity towards the force that for whatever reason that she is not using, in part because Asajj kind of talked her out of her using them. And by the time she's an adult going off to fly with the rebels, that's not her force sensibility has nothing to do with all the good things she does in the season and the show, and won't have anything to do with where she goes from here. It's a part of her blood, but it's not a part of who she is.
Hmm.
What
Yeah,
do you think, Ricky? No, sorry.
I,
Just a quick thing.
like I'm just so
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm disappointed that they they said the word midichlorians again for the first time in decades when they were dancing around it like M count and stuff. Like they have to now, like with what they're doing. But I liked what happened in the Ahsoka show with Sabine, where they specifically say like I think she has the. Did they say midichlorians in that show? I don't know, but they said like she's not talented in the Force, but she
Yeah.
can still do it if she practices her.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Right. So I want the separation from genetics and midichlorians to just I don't know, like desire or something, teaching. And so for Omega specifically, my what I think is going on is she is not force sensitive, but
Mhm.
somehow fake science wise, she has the ability or like her blood carries the ability for midichlorians to carry over when
Yeah.
cloned. I don't know what it
Right.
all is, but it's she can't do anything with the force. but using her blood, they are going to be able to clone Palpatine so that he can use the Force in his new body.
I mean,
Yeah. And
I think that's. Go ahead, Danielle.
Yeah, I think I was going to say what you were going to say, Matthew, is that it's they do say that the reason they want her, the reason that Hemlock wants her, is that not so much that her blood shows a high level of midichlorians, M count, whatever, but that she is what ties the other Force sensitive children into the, like, her blood can take transfusions of their blood with the high midichlorian count and replicate that count without deteriorating the midichlorians. And so they're very careful, and watching it over again, I see they're very careful not to say if she is or isn't. And so I go back and forth. I think she has a little bit, just a teeny tiny, maybe I would call it more potential, maybe, than sensitivity. And I kind of like that we have that term now, like force potential.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, what they use in Ahsoka for Sabine. But not enough to really do anything with. Like, that's not why they wanted her. That's not the point. And I could see it potentially being a thing that, like, she feels every now and then, but that she doesn't follow. And that's okay. Like, I think we've not explored that in Star Wars yet, that you can feel it maybe, but you don't follow it. Or you follow it the way you feel, and not so much to a greater power or something, to gain a greater power. And so I do like that they left it open, and that they were like, we're not going to give you a straight answer because we're not interested in answering that. And I thought that was a brave choice on their part.
I do really like that, because to me it makes it much less of a binary. I don't like the idea of, like, Riki and I just talked about the X-Men, where it's like you either have the mutant gene or you don't. And I don't want midichlorians to be that.
Yeah.
I'm okay if midichlorians are sort of the in basketball, when it comes to, like, developing new talent, they often say, like, you can teach someone how to shoot, you can teach someone how to play defense. You can't teach tall. And, like, some people just are genetically gifted in ways that are going to make them. But a very tall person who is never trained in basketball is probably going to have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah.
And a very short person, I watched Spud Webb, a 4'10" incredible basketball player. And I kind of like that idea of, like, your genetics make it a lot easier. Especially what I was actually going to say, Danielle, although I think the point you brought up is even more relevant. In the books, they have established that Ray Palpatine, Ray Skywalker, her father, the clone of Palpatine, was not force sensitive.
Yeah.
So they definitely established that it can, like, skip generations like that. Although he's a clone of Palpatine, so I don't know if it's a however you want to talk about it.
Yeah, I think it was he was viewed as a failure.
Exactly. But there was enough of it in his blood that Ray could become this incredible force user as his descendant. And then at the same time, you have a character like Chirrut, who I think is a follower of the Force in terms of, like, for him, the Force is more like a religion. And I think that he has his incredible battle reflexes and ability, while blind, to know exactly where the laser beams are coming from and to, like, survive and fight. To me, those are Jedi reflexes. Those are, like, he is tapping into a tiny bit of the Force. But I think there's no thought that, like, if he'd been found at birth, he could have gone on to become a Jedi. And so to me, all those things all speak to the kind of the much more spectrum of Force use abilities that we're talking about here.
I think the High Republic plays with that a lot, and showing that just how many different sects and religions there were for Force users, of varying degrees of power, I guess. And it wasn't the word I was looking for, but it works. And so I like that idea too, that it doesn't always look the same. And the Jedi for a long time were the only ones who did that the galaxy really did see with that, but doesn't always have to be that way.
As Luke says in Last Jedi, that the idea that we have sole ownership of the Force is, arrogance and ego. I'm horribly misquoting there.
I just want a quick aside. Spud Webb was 5'6", It's like he looks like he's 4'10" on a basketball court, but he's just like a perfectly average, normal human being height.
The shortest basketball players are much taller than me. Still,
That's fair. I was 8 when I was watching him, so it's entirely possible that got overstated in my mind.
Like he's literally my height. But yeah, like what he can do is amazing.
Right. Because he was playing on the same court with Hakeem
Yeah.
Olajuwon and Dirk Nowitzki, and yes, I
Yeah.
mentioned a Maverick for our Dallas resident here, our former Texas resident. Well, that was a whole conversation I didn't expect at all, and I'm really glad we had. But I want to go back to what I wanted to talk about Asajj, which is
Okay. So I said boo initially because I really did not like the combination of what they did in the trailer and how prominently or not prominently she was featured in the show. And I
Sure.
felt like that was the moment where the trailer probably did the show disservice, and I have negative feelings carrying over from that. Like the episode itself was okay. Like it was good to see her, and I think the action sequences were great. And her seeing Asajj as the, I don't know what we call it, gray Jedi, right? Or not dark side anymore was good. And I'm happy for her. I'm happy for her character. And I agree that the future of Asajj looks interesting and that they are hinting at that. It's like a setup for a spin-off. Just like leave her out of the trailer because of the expectations that sets up were not
That's
met,
true.
in my opinion.
That's fair. I think they put a lot in the trailer and in their weekly, like, on Mondays they would release like little mini trailers for it and stuff. They put a lot in those that I was really surprised that they would. Like they spoiled Finnick when she was going to show up. They spoiled when
Yeah.
exactly Asajj was going to show up. And there were so many so I got to see screeners for it. And there were so many of those that I saw, those like little mini clips, mini trailers that they release weekly. I was like, I'm really glad. Like, I'm sad that people didn't get to experience this naturally because I'm really glad that I did. Like that. That was something that as I was watching naturally, I was like, oh my God, yes. Like, and I'm disappointed for people that they didn't get that same type of experience.
And I think it just confirmed I should just not watch trailers. That's I think if I'd been totally surprised by Ventress.
You
But
can have good trailers, but
the other thing for me is it's not just that I thought Ventress would play a bigger part. It's that for Ventress to show up breaks canon. One of the best, and we've had this struggle about like how canonical are the Star Wars novels in the new Disney canon, and Dark Disciple. Let me get to this. Dark Disciple is, I think, one of the best books, and it tells a story of Asajj Ventress. And we did a whole review of it. I'm not going to say the specific thing that breaks character, but like, if you take that book literally, that this character should not be available to come do this at this point in the overall story. And then the writers then said, or the producer of the show said, don't worry, we're not just ignoring that. We are going to we are keeping that in mind, which opens all these questions of, are they retconning the book? Are they saying that like something happened at the end of the book that we didn't know? And to me, it's the fact that that wasn't addressed in any way, shape, or form. And
it was addressed in one form where she says a very ambiguous line.
A cat has many lives, right?
See, I have read the book, and I don't know, to me it doesn't take away anything from that. I think the book, though in some ways feels final, in other ways is intentionally not. And I think that I don't think they answered the question in the show, but I am also glad they didn't answer the question in the show because I don't want to know that answer in a story that isn't about her. I want to know the answer in a story that is more focused on her, that gives time to do that story justice and to explain it in a way that isn't like trying to catch everybody up on what's happened when the episode itself is already only like 23 minutes long.
Right.
And so that's to me is why I didn't care that much about it.
Mhm.
And I don't think that it breaks canon. I think it extends on canon, which Star
Right.
Wars is wont to do with everything, not just with
Right.
books. But there's things that happen in the prequels that the Clone Wars extends upon and doesn't really break. And so I don't know. I think at this point I've come to expect it from the franchise.
Okay.
And so it doesn't bother me as much.
I guess I just
Hmm.
well, I think if we'd already announced that a new Asajj Ventress project was coming, I think I'd feel much more like where you were.
That's fair.
I'm afraid I don't have the confidence that we're ever gonna get that. And
I
I guess
do. I'll keep
that
it for
Oh,
you.
yeah, like 100%. I believe it's coming.
and I think
The
again
voice actress pretty much confirmed it in an interview.
okay. Well, I hadn't seen that, so if that's true, then yeah, I will feel a lot better about it. And yeah, I think there are I've read the book too. I love it. I think it's phenomenal. I think there's a couple of ways you can kind of shift things around a bit so that it fits. I thought maybe they could have had another episode with her, maybe a bit of a backstory episode, or just like that line of like, "Well, cat has many lives," like just a little bit more about just if it something to let me know, like, did that book already happen in this canon? And what we're talking about is that the ending of the book isn't quite what we thought, and something else is happening. Is it about Night Sister stuff? Because that's certainly another. You know what? If you haven't read the book, you don't want to get spoiled on it. We've done a bunch of things by it. I'm just gonna say right now, thank you so much for listening. Tune out now because there's no way to talk about this without it. Um, Dooku kills her in the book, and so to me, either A, she came back to life somehow, or she wasn't actually fully dead, or Night Sister resurrection magic, like all that's possible, or the entire book is gonna happen in the future. And like all the stuff with her and Vess is going to happen like going after Thrawn instead of Dooku. I think there's lots of ways to do it. I the fact that it's so wide open, I think, just bothered me a little bit. But I mean, it's awesome though that for other people it's not. Like I don't want people to have the same problems I do. I want people to enjoy these things, you know, uh, um, without getting hung up on these things.
Yeah, to me it was very this is like my perspective of it watching it was that it's
Uh-huh.
very obvious that it took place after the books and that she was resurrected likely through the magics of the water that she was placed in.
Yeah.
And because that is very sacred to the Dark Sisters magic
Yep.
and everything that they use with it. And so to me that fits without changing anything that happened in the book.
Mhm.
It doesn't even have to change the very ending. It can just be it happened later. Someone came or something happened or whatever.
Yeah.
And that yeah. So it all fits to me. And the actress has said that they're not done with Ventress yet, essentially.
Yeah.
So to me, that indicates probably I thought maybe Tales of the Jedi season 2, but and they might still do that. They might do another Tales of the Jedi or her own show or a show about the path. I would love a show about the path.
Right. I mean, I both love this, but also Riki, you might throw things. What they may well do is do us a show about Ventress that really introduces the idea of that there's some restorative, regenerative properties in Night Sister magic, and then connect to Thrawn being able to tap into that, and that's what all eventually leads to Palpatine actually finally being returned. Like
That
I
would
can
fit
see
in
ways to
with the
also have this
Ahsoka
together.
show. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I mean, they already did it with
Yeah.
Maul.
yeah,
Yeah. It's true.
yeah. So
So like I agree that the book still exists. It's canon. Question mark as to how she comes back to life.
mhm.
What I like going back to the thing about trailers, Matthew, about you saying like never don't watch trailers. I fundamentally disagree with that. I watch trailers. I want to enjoy them and get excited about the things that they are trailers for. And
Mhm.
people need to do a better job of making trailers, in my opinion. Like
Agreed.
this was a trailer fail, a lot like right up there with Castaway. It's not completely related to Star Wars, but in that trailer, I'm spoiling this movie. They show Tom Hanks get off the island in the trailer.
Oh, do
It's
they
like
really?
what the
What?
heck?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember that. I remember that, and like I will say, for me, the ultimate trailer crime. I know I'm very critical of the prequels. I know I've learned to be much more okay with them. If while sitting in a movie theater watching it for the first time, I had seen all the previews about this dark side using person with a crazy face using a regular lightsaber. And then all of a sudden, for the first time in that damn theater, I'd seen a double bladed lightsaber. I would walk out saying it was the greatest Star Wars movie ever made. Like that trailer alone, I think cost so much love for that movie. Yeah, you're right. And then we can debate about that another time, but I definitely think could be better.
Yeah, so my thing is the degree you have to add layers. Like in the trailer, they showed Asajj. It's like, oh, Asajj Ventress is gonna be in this season. And she was, but she didn't do much. So it wasn't like a huge step up from her appearing in the trailer to her appearing in the show. It was like, like a very small step. And so that's the issue I have. And especially for her character and like the question marks around her coming back to life and stuff. Yeah, like another episode with Asajj or like a preview to this one, like showing what she was doing, like her meeting up with Fennec, that kind of stuff. And especially for if they're setting, well, I mean, they are, like, we believe they are setting up a future show or series or something with her. Please acknowledge the romance with Quinlan Voss, right? Like, I needed a line. This reminds me of Kenobi. Like, I needed him to say the name Satine in that show, or to like remember her in some way because she's so important to him. And so if you bring Asajj back, Quinlan Voss is an important character to her from that book. And we've seen, like, we believe he's still alive, right? From the Kenobi show. Like, his name was dropped as being alive in that era. So have a thing where she says, I have a Jedi, like, I have to go find. And have Hunter say something like, oh, like, do you have to settle a score? And like, no, not quite. Like, something different. Like, acknowledge that he exists. Like, that's what I want.
I have more faith that they'll do that than I have faith that they'll ever name drop Satine and Padme again. I have lost hope. Star Wars is supposed to be all about hope, but you know what? They have taken my hope from me when it comes to Padme or Satine ever being name dropped. Like, if I accepted they would never do it when they didn't have Bo-Katan say her name in The Mandalorian.
Yeah, that's
like
fair.
that still pisses me off. I'm like, they didn't do it then. The absolute opportune moment for them to do that, and they didn't.
Right.
They're never
She
gonna
just
do
said
it.
my sister, right?
Yeah.
Like my
No,
sister
she did.
ruled
I don't even
Mandalore.
know if she said
No, she
my
talked about her
sister.
father. A
She
character
talked about her father. Yeah.
Oh gosh,
don't get me
yeah.
started. It still makes me angry.
All right. So there's a lot of feelings there. We'll just see. We'll see what the future brings for
I
us.
have very strong feelings.
You guys
about,
have to
like,
make me feel better about it. I would wonder though, Danielle, and for our listeners, I am curious. I think because part of it was the internet spent so much time discussing it. I wonder because you got to see these episodes earlier, if that also helped. Because I remember
I didn't
there's.
see this one earlier. This
Oh,
was
you
the
did?
only. This one and the finale are the only ones I didn't get to see early.
Okay.
Yeah.
Never mind then. Ignore me.
Yeah.
All right. Last question I want to say, and we've only got an hour, so I don't want to go too long. And we'll have a little bit of bonus content. How do you think this changed you as a Star Wars fan? Like, what did this show change or introduce, or like just give you a new understanding of in terms of like how you understand Star Wars as a whole?
I mean, as a fan, it changed a lot. I try not to get emotional with this, but the Bad Batch started in what, 2021? I started my TikTok in 2021, I think. And a lot of my content was about the clones, was about Bad Batch, and I met a lot of my friends through our shared love of this. Some of whom I got to meet last year at Celebration, some who I got to meet this past month in LA. And on that level, it changed everything for me, and so it heightened my friendships, but I think it also heightened my love for Star Wars in that it focused on something that I cared deeply about in Star Wars, which is the clones. And you can say the Clone Wars did to an extent, but I think there's still like it did dive into the nuances of the clones and intricacies of their lives and their thoughts and everything. But I think the Bad Batch did that on a consistent level.
Yeah.
week after week after week, because the focus is this group of clones. It's not shared with the Jedi. It's not shared with the Separatists and the Republic. It's just them. And I think that allowed me to really see how, like, I mean, it was Star Wars catered for me, not just for me, but like with
Mhm.
my intentions in mind. And I think it's always really special to have that in something that you love, even if it's for a short period of time.
Yeah.
It allows you to see something, I think, in the other material that you maybe wouldn't see before, I guess.
And I have my own, but I will just say on that, like, I wouldn't have found your content. I would have never found Erin, who's now become one of my co-hosts. And I don't think Star Wars generations by this new name would exist because, like, there was TikToks about Mando, but Mando for the most part is a fairly standalone thing. It's
Yeah.
in the Star Wars universe, but it's fairly disconnected from everything else. I think a lot of the change that I've gone through over the last couple of years as a fan, particularly in terms of rethinking how I see the prequels and rethinking especially how I see the clones, is because, like you said, this show was aimed not at me as a Star Wars fan. It was aimed at people who grew up with the clones, had a real love from them, and so kind of like I got to see that reflected through folks like you and Aaron and other folks who are, not the grumpy old fogies like myself. So yeah, I just really love that as well. I'll just then quickly say again what I think for me was this really helped to widen the Star Wars universe for me.
Hmm.
The fact that, with the exception of like a couple of brief shots of dark side users, um, like I don't think a hero ever picked up a lightsaber at any
Yeah.
point in the show. Um, it had that same Rogue One appeal of just like feeling like, yes, like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and Leia are having the big battles, but those battles are made up of all these individual people and all these individual scouting missions and all this individual stuff. And it filled in more of the time that I'm really fascinated about like how does a republic go into becoming an empire so quickly. And um I think it has a lot of lessons that are really important for us today in terms of how security, how fear can be used to manipulate us to give up our freedoms. um and yeah, I just feel like I have a much broader understanding of the Star Wars world because of this show.
I will say my biggest takeaway from this show is that I enjoy Star Wars when it is telling kind of new original stories, even if it's like with older characters or filling in gaps in the history, in the timeline. What I am starting to dislike is the conspiracy theory level, like connecting of the red strings, especially over gaps of like 50 years, like with Necromancer, that
Mhm.
it's like reaching a self-referential point that I'm not enjoying.
Yeah.
Like I said, I enjoyed this show when it was its own thing and the
Mm.
Bad Batch was off doing their adventures and we were learning about them. We're learning about the galaxy and how it's changing. And then we got, in my opinion, got bogged down in Necromancer over like a season and almost a half.
Yeah, I think it's fair.
Sure.
Well, listeners, let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your feedback. We're going to have a quick bonus content about other Star Wars projects. But for now, thank you all so much. We have spoken. Star Wars Generations is an Ethical Panda podcast, part of the True Story FM network. If you enjoyed the show, please share it and leave a rating or review in your podcast app. The best way to support us is by becoming a member. Find information and all the links in the show notes. Thanks for listening.